Hello everyone, I'm David Boucher and this is Return on Racing. Return on Racing is powered by Boucher Analytics, which helps race teams and drivers drive efficiencies off track so they can fuel success on track. Return on Racing is also brought to you by the Motorsport Sponsorship Accelerator, the most cutting edge resource out there to learn how to find, maintain, and grow long-term sponsorship relationships. If you're interested in finding out more, please visit the Boucher Analytics website at www.boucheranalytics.com and use the navigation links at the top right hand of the screen. Okay, so in today's episode, we're going to cover the fifth installment of the Racing's Second Revolution series. I hadn't actually planned for this to go to 5 parts. I was thinking about this in terms of 4. Now, before I get into why I'm including this 5th part, let's go ahead and recap what we covered in the first 4 episodes or installments, and of course, these will be linked in the show notes. So part 1 exposed the fragility of today's model. Teams rent visibility instead of owning assets, and this is, of course, the current sponsorship paradigm. Part 2 showed how storytelling gives those assets meaning. Part 3 introduced the Boucher Analytics Motorsports Relevant Pyramid, the framework for building independence through culture, ubiquity, and own revenue. In Part 4, which to me was the most fun part to write and think about, illustrated the concept of own revenue via hypothetical examples pertaining to small, mid-sized, and elite F1 teams. The reason I wanted to create a 5th installment was because what I'm proposing in the first 4 parts really goes against the orthodoxy of the fundamental business model in motorsport. And I knew, based on past experience pitching these types of ideas, that I was going to get resistance. And so I figured, why not just address this resistance head on? The sponsorship model has been in use in some form for another almost since Formula One's inception. And as imperfect as it is, it's safe. But is it really safer in the long term? Arguably not, because not doing anything is itself a choice, without the benefit of having a say in the potential consequences. Ultimately, if anything derails racing's second revolution as I envision it, it won't be technical factors, since everything we've talked about so far basically rests on well-known business fundamentals. In this 5th and final installment of the Racing Second Revolution series, we'll cover the aspect of any great change initiative that is never talked about directly until it's too late, yet has the potential to derail new ideas from the start, and that's resistance. The main risk is nothing more complex than skepticism, and while resistance usually takes many forms, it tends to come across only under the guise of practicality. I'm going to cover 9, so there are 9 in this show, of the most common objections, all valid on the surface, yet I assure you they are entirely surmountable in practice. So let's just jump right into the first possible objection. Number 1, you're underestimating how dependent we are on sponsorship cash flow. This proposal for a new motorsport business model does not underestimate the current dependency on sponsor cash flow. In fact, that entrenched sponsor cash flow is an enormous source of risk for race teams in the current paradigm, and it is exactly why Boucher Analytics proposes a second revolution in motorsport financing. It's in fact because I'm not underestimating at all the amount of sponsorship cash flow in motorsport. Today, without sponsorship, the vast majority, and perhaps all, racing teams would not make it to the starting line. That has been true for decades, and it will likely be true for years to come, and I'll cover more of the timing as this episode goes on. This new model proposes an alternate way of thinking, but the reality is that any industry shift takes time, especially when the current way of doing things feels institutionalized. Certainly, anyone who has spent time dialing for racing dollars will agree that in an ideal world, sponsorship would be purely optional. But practically speaking, what I'm proposing, is about creating compounding secondary income that gradually reduces exposure to sponsor volatility. The goal is gradual diversification, not immediate replacement. And that absolutely puts the emphasis on the fact that there is no underestimation of sponsor cash flow. Right now, it's the lifeblood of motorsport. And to put some extremely loose numbers on this, a simple reallocation over time, for instance, sponsorship dropping from 80% to 70% of total income, is how this resilience begins. So small steps can snowball into something much bigger. The second point is that perhaps I make this sound cheaper and easier than it is. I've always said, talk is cheap. That is certain. Actually building product lines, pop-ups, or licensing programs, well, that requires investment in talent, and that is not cheap at all. Today, many teams just don't have the resources to take on the second revolution of motorsport financing. That's true. The only counter to this is full and absolute transparency. Yes, it's expensive if you look at everything that has to be done. But then again, so are sponsorship sales that take forever to close and cost a fortune to deliver, yielding very little in terms of usable cash. And that's a cost I don't think motorsport teams necessarily always take fully into account. In its most de-risked form, this is a capital reallocation argument, not an additional cost. Hypothetically, you're redirecting budget from rented visibility to owned assets, starting small and then building up over time. Third potential objection or source of resistance is the question, who's supposed to run all this? Outside of major motorsports organizations with PR, legal, and marketing departments, teams are built around engineers, mechanics, and logistics experts, not operators. That's fair. And let's be honest, an F1 team's marketing department is probably already stretched pretty thin, just keeping their piece of the traveling circus going. Again, the way forward is to start small with low-risk experiments that can scale up. As revenues grow, so can team size. Let me put this to you. Are you looking to identify the next generation of leaders in your organization? Ask them to pitch you a way to replace consistently 5% of your team's seasonal sponsorship revenue, or margin after delivery costs if you want to be really ambitious, and then just take it from there. Number 4 is a very straightforward source of resistance. There's no proof that this works. Unfortunately, it's usually those with the most pull in an organization, any organization, who are the most reticent to try new things. But this is a completely understandable objection. Who wants to stick their neck out for a totally unproven concept or idea, especially if they've spent years building up very important social capital? The subtlety here is defining what works actually means. In other words, what exactly does success look like? This goes back to my problem-solving North Star borrowed from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and that's start with the end in mind. In the long term, success would mean more money coming in, independent from sponsor commitments. But in the shorter term, stepping stones to that point could be activating certain numbers of a certain demographic at offline events, or introducing a capsule merchandise line to get exposure in various media outlets. From this angle, there are absolutely cases where this has been done. Granted, actual results for these campaigns will be kept private by their owners, but one has to assume that they wouldn't have been initiated in the first place if there wasn't a solid basis. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of various scale, but these are in no way exhausted. So Red Bull, which started out as an energy drink company, but is now a lifestyle brand of which racing is only one part. Think about how Red Bull was marketed in the early 2000s and how much a part of club culture the drink was. Pierre Gasly, who enjoys golf and just introduced a capsule collection under the Bogey Gang name. And here's one that is extremely under the radar, Lancia with Akimbo. This is a collaboration between a car brand whose glory days are behind it and a very niche clothing brand. And the result was a sellout. And I've got a link to this particular collaboration if you follow the show notes to get to the source article for this episode. So the proof is there. It's just that the case studies are fragmented and it will take time before they become more numerous, thus consolidating the consensus that there are alternative ways forward besides sponsors. In other words, now is the time to gain that all-important first mover advantage, or, to borrow a racing term, to take pole position in racing's second revolution. Number 5, the 5th possible source of resistance. The Concord Agreement and IP rules make this impossible. Now, the way I phrase this objection, it's very specific to F1, but it could be generalized to other motorsports series, and the crux is that teams can't unilaterally use and monetize certain assets and IP. To be clear, Vaucher Analytics is not a legal firm. I am not a lawyer. However, the go-ahead assumption is that while there certainly would be legal obstacles to surmount in any type of effort to create more owned IP, they would not be deal breakers. Teams can't use F1 assets or likenesses freely, but they don't have to prove out a concept. The assumed way forward is to create universes inspired by, not reproducing, team identity, evoking a brand essence rather than sticking strictly to brand identity. Over the long run, this could actually be beneficial for teams because if they can get fans to associate with an aesthetic or emotional identity, what one target demographic might call vibes, rather than specific drivers or cars, the potential is far more open to commercialize a broader range of products and experiences. Number 6, the sixth form of possible resistance to racing's second revolution. What if sponsors don't like it? This is another completely understandable objection. If sponsors are paying, perhaps substantially, for you to endorse their products now, why would they want to pursue that relationship with you if they realize you're trying to replace them as soon as you can? Again, it's unlikely that agreements are so ironclad that teams can't pursue their own initiatives, and in the present, if a team and/or driver is providing a return on a sponsor's investment, why would the sponsor abandon that return all of a sudden anyways? Furthermore, owned IP products produce stronger fan engagement, richer data, and deeper storytelling, all of which makes sponsorship more valuable for brands, not less. Remember, racing's second revolution doesn't assume an immediate replacement of sponsorship revenue. Hopefully, two sources, that is to say, owned IP and sponsorship revenue, will become complementary. And in the best case, having those owned sources of IP will make getting that sponsorship easier than it was before. Seventh source of resistance, this will take too long to pay off. Now, this isn't so much an objection as it is just a statement of fact, no different from a racing team starting from the bottom of the pack with the goal of moving to the top of the grid with an almost inevitable stop in the midfield. Unlike on the racetrack, speed is not the focus here. Chasing speed in developing owned assets could actually be detrimental to the end goal of reducing sponsor dependence. The timeline and results will vary depending on level of investment and, frankly, just plain luck. So, for example, timing or a beneficial viral post. But for any organization attempting to make themselves more independent, a very high level, very loose, representative timeline would be as follows. In year one, a team might focus on storytelling and limited run products and experiences to test the market. Years 2 and 3 would involve leveraging those successes to build own communities and invaluable data sets. And then for years 4 and beyond that, this would involve having an established, diversified portfolio of team assets, leading to a measurable reduction in sponsor dependency. Eighth form of potential resistance. Perhaps I'm romanticizing culture too much. Here are my thoughts on this. Many of the older guard who have spent their lives only in racing see culture, lifestyle, and storytelling as fluff that distracts from performance. And if you need proof, just think back to the commentary that Lewis Hamilton received early in his career when he dared to express himself via his interest in fashion. There's no other way to say it other than this is an outdated take. Racing itself is a culture, and it only becomes more interesting and rich as it becomes infused with other areas that fans old and new appreciate. Music, art, other sports, and the list goes on. Perhaps counterintuitively, the more racing evolves away from just what's happening on track, the more it has the potential to become sustainable, which will then lead to more and better on-track action. Even if your racing organization is satisfied with the status quo of being a rolling billboard, culture is what makes your team appealing to sponsors. The more you embrace culture, the more you make yourself attractive to sponsors looking to tap into that very culture themselves. Ninth and final source of resistance to my thoughts on racing's second revolution. This is all brand talk. Where's the fan in all of this? Actually, the Voce Analytics Motorsport Relevance Pyramid, on which racing's second revolution rests, is built for fans. Everything on the pyramid is built around them, around delivering things that make them fall even more in love with racing and perhaps you as a driver or your racing team. The ubiquity layer in that pyramid is the most concentrated expression of this fan devotion. Teams and drivers become ubiquitous by creating meaningful daily touchpoints, ownership opportunities, and emotional participation. The stronger the fan connection, the more leverage the team gains in every negotiation in the short term, and the more they control their destiny in the long term. I want to close this episode and this series with a quote from Nelson Mandela, and I want to say up front, quoting Nelson Mandela in the context of motorsport seems borderline indulgent, but it's the quote that came to mind as I was wrapping this up, and it's the perfect quote to usher in racing's second revolution. And honestly, it perfectly exemplifies values that have been displayed on track since the earliest days of racing. Here's the quote: "It always seems impossible until it's done." Reducing fatalities to near zero on a racetrack seemed impossible at the dawn of the motor age, yet racing did it. Pushing a car beyond 200 miles per hour at the Indy 500 seemed impossible until Tom Sneva and his team did it, and on and on. As with any new idea, the early objections will far outweigh the efforts to try new things. These objections are valid, but they're entirely surmountable. Eventually, teams will act, not debate, and the results will speak for themselves. Racing's second revolution will then be truly underway. And that is it for this episode of Return on Racing. That is it for the series on Racing's second revolution, and that is it for the third season of Return on Racing. I want to close all of this out as usual by thanking you for spending your time with me. I really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed these insights, I invite you to visit the front page of the Votionetics website, where you can sign up for the Return on Racing newsletter. This is a newsletter that's delivered to you every Sunday in quick hits. It's less than 500 words, and the idea is to deliver actionable insights that you can apply directly to your own motorsports operations. So again, you can sign up for that either on the front page of the Votionetics website, or there'll be a link that you can follow in the show notes. I want to thank you again for tuning in with me here on Return on Racing. I really hope you'll join me for the start of season 4. I've got some really exciting things planned, one of which is the follow-up in my series on the state of. So I've done the state of IndyCar, and as WEC, as F1, as WRC, and some others wrap up, I'll be writing my thoughts on the state of those series now and the thoughts ahead. And of course, in addition to that, I've got a lot of other things planned. So thank you so much again for your support in the past. Thank you so much for your anticipated support in the future. I really, really appreciate both. And I look forward to speaking with you on the next episode of Return on Racing.